From stories on urban development and historic preservation to coverage of politics and crime statistics, nextSTL is one of the most popular blogs about St. Louis. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 stories of 2013 according to nextSTL with its founder and editor, Alex Enan. Stay with us next on City Corner. Hi, I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome to City Corner. Today we have a really exciting show. I've been waiting for a long time to have Alex Enan. He's the founder and editor of nextSTL on the show. And today we're going to talk about the top 10 stories, according to nextSTL, the top 10 stories of 2013. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I was saying, I've wanted to have you on the show for a really long time, but this worked out well because it's a great way to kind of recap what happened this past year and to look at some of the stories that you followed. For those that don't know, before we get started, tell us, I should say, about nextstl.com.
Yeah, so nextSTL, the website has been around for about 4 years, 5 years almost, and it really just covers, it started out covering the kind of minutia, the things that were happening that kind of build a city, like literally decisions on sidewalks, streetlights, parking, hearings, things like that just don't get coverage in like kind of the local news, and you don't see it on TV. And so we're just trying to build awareness of what creates a city and how people can get involved. I think one of the things that St. Louis suffers from is just not having enough people involved in those small decisions. And so it literally started with me walking down the street and saying, I wonder who decided that was going to happen, or who decided that building came down, that kind of thing. And it's kind of changed. I mean, we now cover some of the big development stories, and we're trying to be the place where you can learn about your city. So, if you're new to St. Louis or just kind of want to know what's happening in the city, I think that, not to condemn traditional news, but, it's crime, it's traffic accidents, it's weather, it's sports. And that doesn't really tell you about how the city's changing, what's new, what's happening, what's being proposed, and that kind of thing. So it's a lot of post-reporting. We try to get ahead of the curve and kind of tell people what's coming and how they can weigh in. So,
well, congratulations, by the way. You guys were just voted best blog by the Riverfront Times for Best of St. Louis this past year. Yeah. And I thought they did a great description because they described it as like hyper-local. And a lot of people, and I'll say this is true of myself, go to nextstl.com first to see. I mean, you break stories.
Yeah, we, I tell people, though, it's nice being in a privileged position as a blog. You break one story a month, and people act like, oh, you know everything, and the Post-Dispatch misses a story a month, and they act like, well, you guys don't know anything. You missed everything, So like we're in a good spot because we can take the news that kind of comes to me. I can talk to people I know, and I've been in town 10 years now. I'm not native from here, but I know enough people in enough corners where, like I said, we stumble upon news. But we, increasingly we're searching things out, and we had 25 different people write items for nextSTL. So in terms of how we're able to do it, I mean, we have a lot of people producing material, and the top 10, these are the top 10 most viewed stories from the last year, the most popular, I guess, on the site.
Okay, I was going to ask you that, how you came up with them, but that's what the criteria was.
Yeah, it's just literally number of views, number of reads on the pages, but a number of different authors, a number of different subjects, from store announcements to all kinds of things. So it's kind of, it's fun. It's
okay,
fun
well let's get started. Let's get started with number 10. What was marked at number 10, which is Global Foods Market. And so we have some photos that we'll go along with while you talk about it. So what's interesting? What's interesting about this story? Why is it so popular?
So to kind of set it up, Washington University is building a new student housing development in the Loop. And it's the first real large residential development in the Loop area. And in some respects, people think of the Loop as being kind of a finished place. But, it's really continuing its 30, 40-year development from the time Blueberry Hill started to, Joe Edwards now having the Moonrise Hotel and the pageant and all these different things happening. Well, this is the first big residential project. Now, the residential units are just for students, but you're getting a 24-hour diner in there that's run by Joe Edwards. And you're getting a full grocery store.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I mean, obviously with the construction that they have right now, but yeah, that with the market coming along, and they're extending. I think with WashU, it just feels like more and more buying up more and more property.
Yeah, it's nice to have the university kind of put its stamp on the area because then they're implicitly or explicitly they're kind of responsible for some security and for the image and keeping it clean. And it's like when you have an institutional partner like that invested, it makes a difference. And you see it in Midtown with SLU as well and other places. So you want that. But yeah, the grocery, obviously the diner, the grocery store are open to everybody, and it makes the Loop, increases the potential for that to be really the first kind of car optional 24-hour place in the city. You have the Central West End and now kind of the Loop and parts of downtown, but the grocery store in a lot of places in the city especially is kind of the missing component. So Global Foods is big news, and it's also big because it's a local grocery. And so, I think a lot of people would have been very happy with a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods or something like that. But I really have to kind of commend the university for looking for local partners. They have a local owner of a diner. They have a local, international food store. And for people who don't know, their current store is in Kirkwood. And it's an incredible place. It has all the staples, the paper towels and stuff, but it has incredible international food and a lot of variety. And so I think people are going to love it.
Right.
And it's something that's, again, it provides everything you need, but it's also very unique. And the university has an enormous population of international students, and the Loop is an international neighborhood, and so I think it's going to be very popular.
It fits in, as kind of with
so
the
I think
brand.
that's why people were excited.
We're excited about that one. This one, I feel, the next one, South County Connector. I mean, this is going to be this is going to be ongoing, huh?
Yeah. And we looked at it. The first story we did on it was more than 2 years ago when it was kind of re-proposed, and it's one of these things where these infrastructure projects, they exist on lists in someone's file for decades. I mean, literally decades. And the proponents of it say, this is an idea that was from the 50s. Let's get it done now. And our response is, it's an idea from the 50s. Shouldn't we think about it again and think about it in a new way, in a new context? But the reason that really was news, this time around was that you had people come out against it. So projects like this happen all the time, and we may weigh in, as a site, or I may weigh in and say, this is a crazy idea. But unless you kind of really get a critical mass talking about it, it doesn't gain a lot of traction a lot of times. So we had the city of Maplewood weighed in, we had aldermen from the city of St. Louis weigh in, we had TrailNet, Great Rivers Greenway. You really had a chorus of people saying, slow down and take a look at it.
And I thought I actually was really, not surprised by it, but quite proud of the response, because it was like, hey, there's small businesses here, and I completely get for the people living in South County, or just even just for the transportation capacity of it, you need that flow into the central corridor. But that said, it's like, I mean, there's homes right there, literally.
Yeah, we kind of say in the meantime, this is an idea from 50 years ago, and in that last 50 years, this incredible community has been built. And so kind of the proof is right there. There's this great community in Maplewood, and the businesses and the homes there. Why, who does it benefit to tear it down? So we're trying to ask those questions, like who does it benefit, who loses, who wins, who pays for it, that kind of thing.
Speaking of demolition, and the next one we have, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, it's the Noonan Kosian Art Company downtown. And a lot of what you cover on nextSTL is the historic preservation. It's not just, hey, there's a new something coming or this new development. It's also about historic preservation, and we've got some photos of it. Tell me a bit about this in terms of the art company in downtown. I very much recognize this building and see it all the time.
Yeah, what was incredible is that, one thing, there are only 5 corners in downtown St. Louis that have buildings on all 4 corners.
Okay.
So you think of the downtown central business district, there are only 4 places where you can stand on a corner and there's actually a building and not a parking lot on one of the corners. So there's some value just in this corner as an urban landscape. But this really surprised me. This was written by Greg Johnson, and I didn't know much about it. And he really dove in and did some great research on it. And this was an art gallery where, in the early 1900s, you could go in and buy a Monet. If you think about it, this was a contemporary art gallery. The most sought after art pieces in the world were shown here, and many times for the first time outside of Paris. This was the only place you could see this artwork. So, people don't realize that St. Louis was a center of culture. And we still are in a lot of ways, but we were huge. And this happened in downtown, and it happened in this little kind of storefront, which you can see now, which I think was the fatted calf at some point. So it's had these different facades. So people look at it and kind of on one hand you say, well, it's an eyesore, but you think, what happened here? Look at the history and look at what it could look like if we really spent some time, assessing what's the value of it. So the proposal, it's an old Roberts Brothers property, and there's 3 or 4 buildings in a row. I think they may actually, the whole block, but there are 3 in a row that they were going to tear down 2 of them and create a circular driveway for a hotel. And we just kind of think that there's, people should know what we're tearing down at least before we do it. And it's gone through different ownership, and there's a group out of Chicago that owns it now, and they're supposed to be reassessing what they're going to do with it. But I think the default is still tear it down, create a driveway for a hotel.
Do you think the sentiment for historic preservation, you've been hearing for 10 years now, has really grown? I feel there's a real not a movement, but there's a good, solid group of people here, you know, with the, you know, Starbucks in off of Grand, like who want to keep unique buildings, historic buildings here in St. Louis. Do you feel that's strengthening or weakening?
Yeah, no, I think it's strengthening. And like every year we have more examples of incredible buildings and incredible history that we can save. And almost no building is beyond saving. So you still kind of battle that people drive by a building and, you know, this is an eyesore, why isn't it gone? You know, if we had that mindset, you know, most of Washington Avenue would have been leveled. You know, a lot of those buildings were vacant for a decade or more. The whole Grove area, many of those buildings were vacant for literally 20 years. They were vacant. They were just empty. And that place has come back largely because there were buildings there that could be reused. We didn't have to build from scratch. So I think that attitude is changing. And I think the city is doing a pretty good job of having real preservation review, very thoughtful review, very good research, and thoughtful public hearings about it. So, you know, we, as a website and myself, we tend to focus on the things that slip through and kind of rant and rave against the things that we lose. But we should recognize that we've kept a lot of our, you know, historic infrastructure, and I think we're on a curve where we're seeing more and more saved and more of it appreciated, like you said.
I want to move on before we go to our break to cover Whole Foods and City Walk, because I know as a former Central West Ender, this was, I mean, people have been talking about this lot forever, and now it's like Whole Foods is coming. So tell me about this, and I know why it's important. It's the Whole Foods name, and as you mentioned, when it's a national brand, a national name, it's big news. But tell me a little bit briefly about the history and sort of importance of this.
So the proposal is literally 6 years old now, and so Mills Properties bought what was the doctor's building, knocked it down. There's a large vacant lot there. It's in the middle of the Central West End, basically, and it was, it's been empty. So it got caught in the recession where it was hard to get financing for things. The first proposal was a 30-story tower that was quite ugly, I guess.
We actually have.
Do you have it?
Yeah,
it was an amazing. I mean, you kind of saw it and you're like, oh, awesome, build it. And then you think about it and you're like, oh, that was horrible. And so the new proposal really fills the entire block. And so it's going to be much better in terms of density and feeling like a neighborhood and building an urban environment. Yeah, the image on the left there is that original proposal, which is 6 years old now. But so this project really took off when they had Whole Foods sign on. So it's basically a full-size Whole Foods store. And I think what's fascinating is that it's really not on a main drag. It's at the corner of West Pine and Euclid. It's going to function very much as a neighborhood store. Again, it creates the opportunity to live without a car. You had Straub's and some other things in the neighborhood, but it's going to change the neighborhood.
And it's residential. Whole Foods is just going to occupy another retail space, the lower level, and then it's residential.
Right. Yeah, and you had more, I forget the exact number, more than 200 residential units. So yeah, you're adding 400, 500 people to the neighborhood in addition to the retail store. So
well, no, I think that's going to, I mean, I remember that. I remember the medical building, and then obviously when it's been this vacant lot, and then now with Whole Foods, we've still got a lot of stories to cover. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to talk about, I can't wait till we get to the #1 story. I think a lot of you know what that's going to be, but please stay with us on City Corner.
Watching online videos like this one.
Brushing for 2 minutes now can save your child from severe tooth pain later. 2 minutes, twice a day. They have the time.
Experience St. Louis.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
The odds of this daughter of a clergyman spending 11 weeks at #1 on the U.S. singles charts? 1 in 19 million. The odds of going on to win 6 Grammy Awards? 1 in 1.4 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. I'm Toni Braxton, and I encourage you to learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org.
I'm Sarah Thompson, and welcome back to City Corner. Today we're talking about nextSTL's top 10 stories of 2013. We're kind of counting them down, and we left off. We were just talking about the Whole Foods coming to the Central West End, and now there's something else in the Central West End, and this is a big deal. This is the development company Opus, and they're doing something at Lindell and Euclid, correct?
Right. Yeah, and less than a block away. Again, it's a proposal that was around about 6 years ago, and it was a big tower, and it ran into really the financial downturn, but also there was some community opposition because thought it was just a little bit too large for the site. It cast a shadow over all the homes behind it and some of these little things. So, so they're back with another proposal, and I think it's a little bit more modest scale, and they're changing the proposal literally as we speak to try to make sure that the neighborhood likes it and will approve the final design. So. So yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, it's another sign that the Central West End is just a hot area. And I think, again, in St. Louis, a lot of times we think of the Central West End as being, again, kind of finished. Like it's kind of the hot spot and the expensive shops and the nice restaurants. But there's incredible potential there. I mean, there are many more vacant lots, for better or worse, where we're going to see developments in the next couple of years. So. Since
the top 10 stories were based on popularity, do you find that people are more interested in certain districts like the Central West End than they are in other places? Yeah, or is it just the type of story?
Yeah, I think it's kind of news. I think it's new projects, especially new residential projects and things in popular neighborhoods that get a lot of attention. So, yeah, I've been meaning to do kind of my top 10 stories because I can write something about, traffic policy or parking policy, and I mean, people read it, but it's never going to be on the top 10 list. It's not quite as sexy. So things like this with it has some nice imagery. It's exciting, and it's going to change kind of the face of a neighborhood. So people care about that.
Well, speaking of popular neighborhoods, the Grove is just a very popular neighborhood, growing and growing, and they do a really great job there with the events that they hold every year, and more people moving into that Forest Park southeast area. But let's talk about the Ready Room. I hadn't actually heard this one until I read it on your site.
Yeah, well, no one had heard about it until they read it on the site. But it's exciting, and this is something that's a little bit out of my kind of wheelhouse, but there's an incredible music scene in St. Louis. And it really the story kind of blew up because it's Mike Gracciolo from the Firebird that's doing this as his own venue. And it's built from scratch as a music venue. So, and it's an ugly building, right? It's no one would have missed this if it was torn down. And I think this is, again, a great narrative for our city is that we're taking places like this and making them not just attractive, but landmarks, and making them these places where you'll have 2,000 people there for a show several times a week. I mean, it's a destination. So, so yeah, I think the music scene here is big and very underappreciated, and we don't report on the music scene a lot. But when it kind of collides with development and developing neighborhoods and things like that, it kind of shows up on our site, and we came across it, and it's going to be a cool development.
Yeah, and I think even with the Grove, when you go onto their site and you see they have photos of the before and after of all the rehabs that they've done and renovations for different buildings, not just storefronts, but just some of the houses, and it's really, really remarkable. Yeah. I think it's a great little neighborhood.
Yeah, and again, very unlikely. I think the architect on the Ready Room is Space Architects, which is almost across the street. Their building was another one that was really ugly, and I wouldn't have cared if it was torn down, really, and they've turned it into this amazing space. So it's very cool.
We're going to transition from something a little small to something huge, and this was your story number 4, which is the St. Louis Zoo expansion. So what is going on with this is probably the biggest question. I mean, so the background is Forest Park Hospital was bought, that lot was bought, and what's going to happen? How is this all going to come together, do you think?
So, unfortunately, we may not hear much for a long time now. So they've basically gone through a public visioning process, and the zoo did an incredible job inviting people in, asking for their input, and getting ideas. And so you can see this image where they think that what they can do, and the biggest difference people will see is they can move parking to south of Highway 40. and then get people into the zoo via a gondola, like an aerial gondola or new footbridges and things like that.
We do have an image of that from your site.
Yeah, no, it's
from the
very
gondola
interesting,
site.
and it's again, it's very attractive and very exciting, and they can remove some of the parking from Forest Park and create more space for animals and exhibits and things like that. So, so we'll see. What we'll see is the hospital will completely be gone. So they're taking the hospital down. I think the greatest opportunity is to put like a Forest Park and / zoo specific hotel on the site. You know, when a family comes to St. Louis, and you can spend a long weekend or almost a week in Forest Park. You know, you can go to the Science Center and the History Museum and the Art Museum and
Jewel
the zoo.
Box
And there are hotels close by, but there's nothing really close to those places. You can stay at the Cheshire, which is a crossed and awkward intersection. You can stay at the Chase, which is a very long walk from the zoo. But I think a hotel there that really catered to families and catered to the Forest Park experience would be exceptional.
So is the gondola idea actually proposed by the zoo, or is that your? Because I know a lot of times in the stories I read, you have sort of solutions, and that's a big thing about.
Yeah, everything you see here is, I mean, we kind of commented on some of the ideas they had and how feasible we think they are and how attractive they are, but everything you see in the zoo story is a proposal by the zoo. So they basically put together a framework of development, and now they have to figure out basically how to pay for it and when it can happen, and they need to find partners like a hotel or something to work with. And then, you know, this is a 20 to 30 year plan. So some of this won't happen for a long time. Some of it may happen in the next year or two. But yeah, it's very cool. And again, it's very prominent. Everyone knows and loves the zoo. So
yeah, I think for a while people had said that maybe it would be like administrative and research and kind of like something over there that would be separate, and then the zoo would really just be more about the experience for the visitor. But no, this is all really great information. I thought it was really interesting. Your number 3 story was actually not about development. It wasn't. It's about mapping homicides. And explain that to me, because I know outside of just even what we're covering on this show, you speak a lot about this in terms of the image of St. Louis, politics, crime. So tell me what's important about this story, and we also have the graphic from the story as well.
Yeah, I think what I try to do on the site is just bring some common sense discussion to the issue of crime. So I think you see 2 extremes. You see what appears to be sometimes people saying like, oh, you know, St. Louis is safe, there's nothing to worry about, which again isn't exactly what they say, but then you feel the other extreme is this is the most dangerous place you can be. And the reality is somewhere in between, and just the discussion lacks some intelligence sometimes about, you know, where crime happens, who it happens to. And so I think this was, you know, in a sense this was popular because we put it in a graphic that you could share that was it's kind of visceral. I mean, you look at it and what you see on the map are majority African-American neighborhoods in black, and the number of homicides depicted in orange dots or graphics. And what you see is the city's a big place. And so, you know, there's a lot of ways to talk about this, so hopefully I'm not covering all of it here, but you hear people say things like, you know, Clayton is a very safe place. Well, Clayton is a town of about 12,000 people. There are neighborhoods in St. Louis that have 12,000 people in them that also have no homicides every year. And so there are parts of the city that are as safe as anywhere in the region. There are parts of the city that see way too much crime. And so it's very stark when you put it in an image and when you put it on a map. To show who's being victimized, where the crime's happening, where it's not happening. So I think that's why people kind of paid attention to it.
No, and I appreciate the insight that you do have, and I know, as I said, that you've spoken about this outside of just even, you know, on nextSTL.com, but giving perspective, giving sort of a storyline to that. It's something that we probably don't have time to cover entirely for the reasons for that.
Well, I think if there's a message, it's that crime is a very nuanced topic, and so you can't just say this is dangerous, this isn't dangerous, or crime is always too high. We could cut the number of murders in half and we'd still complain that it's too high. So it's trying to bring some of that perspective to the issue.
No, that's good. That's good. We'll move on to our final 2 that we have, and maybe you can segue these almost together. So number 2 is Pace Properties, the Midtown Station retail development. Yeah.
So this is the Federal Mogul Foundry site, and this is again something that's been coming for a while. I think 6 or 7 years ago, there were some presentations that were circulating about, you know, this idea that there might be a Target store there or some kind of retail development in it. And now I think it's happening, right? And then there's a lot happening right across the street as well, which we'll get to. I think, you know, people don't, the reality in St. Louis is it's very easy and very common and you don't even think about living in the city and driving to Brentwood to shop. That's where the Macy's is, that's where the Home Depot is for most people, that's where Target is and everything else. But policy-wise and revenue-wise for the city, all that retail money is leaving the city boundary. And so when you talk about the city not having enough to pay police or plow streets or something, all of us that work and or live in the city, most of our money is spent outside the city line, the city limits. And so this is big because there, adds a real retail destination. And outside of Hampton Village and Loughborough Commons on the far, far south side, there aren't retail destinations. So this could be big. And you're seeing, 4 or 5 mid-size kind of retailers. And we don't have any news on tenants for that, but you're going to see something like, not a Whole Foods, but something like a Trader Joe's, something like a Marshall's or a TJ Maxx and things like that.
No, it's really, really exciting.
There aren't very many places to shop in the city, and we forget that sometimes.
Which leads to the story that I'm going to go ahead and credit you with breaking this story.
Sure.
So this is number one story is?
So IKEA is building a store in the city of St. Louis, which is it's big locally.
Yeah,
I mean,
this was big. I mean, this was a huge story here.
I mean, it's bigger than, frankly, it's bigger than it should be, so, because we've done stories on, Barnes Jewish and Children's Hospital, the hospital complex, spending $1 billion on development over the next decade, and people read it, but it never catches fire,
Well, it's so funny after this came out, so many people were like, St. Louis has an IKEA, I can now stay here, and you're absolutely right, because there's so many other things going on in town, but everyone really took hold of this.
And so things like this are, I don't want to, the importance of it can easily be overstated, but it is important in terms of revenue for the city. It's important just for, as a landmark, and this goes along with Whole Foods, and there's a Mercedes dealership being built in the city for the first time in a couple decades. All of these things matter, and I can think back, my experience here is short enough where when I knew I was moving to St. Louis, I came here for a weekend. It was a rainy, dreary weekend, and all I did was drive around the city. I had never been to St. Louis other than the McDonald's on the riverfront. So, I wanted to see the city, and I was looking as an outsider, looking for landmarks of, okay, what's the hot neighborhood? Where do I live? And I found the medical complex and the Euclid Strip, which seemed, again, it was a rainy, dreary weekend, so it didn't seem too lively, but it seemed like maybe that's the place where people go. But frankly, if there had been a Whole Foods on a corner or an IKEA, it literally is an instant landmark for anyone moving here from outside or visiting that, okay, this is where the city is. This is where people shop. This is where people live, and this is exciting. So it matters. It doesn't change everything. It doesn't save the city. It doesn't do any of that. But it will save me some trips to other cities to shop. And it's big. Like IKEA brings in, they'll have 100 million people shop. Not 100 million. I'm sorry, 1 million people shop in the store every year. $100 million in sales. It's big, and the spinoff is big. So when you see an IKEA open, you usually see a dozen, 2 dozen stores open in the area. You'll see more restaurants. You'll see a lot of things. So
no, it's very exciting, and like you said, it means a lot for St. Louis. And I just we will have to have you back definitely later on in the year to talk about some of your stories. I want to say keep up the good work, because I know you wear a lot of hats, have a lot of responsibilities, and you have a great team. So thank you for being here, and thank you for going over the stories with us. And if you want to check it out, it's nextSTL.com. I'm telling you great stories about what's going on. We call it hyper local. I mean, really what's going on block by block in St. Louis. So you got to check it out. It's nextSTL.com. And again, I want to thank Alex Enan, the founder, owner, and editor, for being here. Thanks again. And thank you at home for watching, and keep it right here on STL TV, Experience St. Louis.